Hey everyone, and welcome back to this class. In this lecture, I'm going to go over a better way to install data science and machine learning libraries for Python for Windows users. Historically, Windows users have had a lot of problems installing this stuff. Luckily, these days there is an option that makes things very painless and just as easy as they are on Linux or Mac. That is Anaconda. In fact, even if you're not on Windows, you can still use Anaconda. It's nice because it isolates your environment from the defaults provided on your system. So for example, you can have Python 3 in Anaconda, but Python 2 as your system default. When I first started these courses, I wasn't keen on Windows since there were a few essential libraries that couldn't be installed on Windows without a significant amount of effort, if at all. In my view, anything beyond a couple of lines in the console or clicking an install file is too much. And believe me, some students even have trouble with that, so it's good not to make things too complicated before you can even begin the course. Nowadays, that has changed. It's a lot easier to install things on Windows, in large part thanks to Anaconda. And so this lecture is all about how to install all the data science and machine learning libraries you'll need on Windows using Anaconda. So in this lecture, I'm going to walk you through how to install Anaconda as well as some of the libraries you might need that don't already come with Anaconda. You'll find that most of the common libraries such as NumPy and SciPy are already included, so if that's all you want to use, then for you it's just a one-click install. On this slide, I'm going to give you a super short summarized version of this lecture, so you don't have to walk through the installation with me if you don't want to. For some people, that really helps since you can see it, but if you can do it on your own, feel free. So, number 1, download and install Anaconda. This is just a one-click install. It already includes NumPy, SciPy, Matplotlib, and Pandas. That's all we need for the NumPy stack in Python, linear regression, and logistic regression, and a few more courses. It also comes with NLTK, which is what we use for NLP, and scikit-learn, which has some pre-built machine learning models. Now, even though this stuff comes by default, you can still update them if you want. So you can do conda update NumPy, for example, and that will update NumPy. Number 2, install deep learning libraries. We've got pip install TensorFlow, that's going to install TensorFlow. And if you want to install Keras, you have to first do conda install pip, which is going to update pip, and then you can install Keras using pip install Keras. If you don't update pip first, you might get an error. Next we have CNTK, which is Microsoft's deep learning library. So you do pip install and then the CNTK URL, which you can get from Microsoft's website. So I'm not posting any URL here because the version could likely change in the future, and so you just Google search how to install CNTK and you can get a URL just like this. Next we have PyTorch, that's conda install -c peterjc123 PyTorch. After that we have Theano, so that's conda install Theano, or conda install Theano PyGPU if you have an NVIDIA GPU and you've installed the CUDA toolkit already. Number 3, install OpenAI Gym. That's just pip install Gym. If you want to be able to play Atari games also, then that's more involved, so just skip to the end of this lecture where I walk you through that. If you want to play and save videos using OpenAI Gym, then you also have to install FFmpeg. So the first thing we're going to do is go over to the Anaconda website. That's anaconda.com/download. Scroll down to the Windows section and click on either Python 3.6 or Python 2.7. Or if you're watching this lecture in the future and there's a new version, get that. The code in my courses is compatible with both Python 2 and Python 3, so in that regard, it doesn't really matter which one you get. In the lectures, you might see Python 2 code, but the best way to make sure you're seeing the latest version is to git pull inside the course repo. So make sure you're always doing that because I'm constantly making new updates. Now, although Python 3 is newer, there are still reasons to use Python 2. For example, in your work, you might use Python 2. Or certain platforms like Google App Engine only support Python 2. So if you're running a web app there, that means you're stuck with Python 2. It does have great scalability features, so there are many good reasons to use Google App Engine. If you want to get more insight on whether to choose Python 2 or Python 3, just check out the appendix lecture, Python 2 versus Python 3. So now that we've downloaded the install file, all we need to do is click on it. That's what I mean by one-click install. You click on this, hit OK a few times, and everything is done. Unfortunately, I gave my username a space, which kind of sucks, but that's what happened. So I'm sure some of you have a space in your username too, so if I come across any issues, at least you'll know what to do. Alright, so everything's installed. So essentially everything except the deep learning libraries have already been automatically installed. So you don't need to manually install NumPy, SciPy, Matplotlib, Pandas, IPython, or scikit-learn. So if you're taking my NumPy course or any course that doesn't use modern deep learning libraries, you already have everything you need. So let's go into IPython and make sure that's the case. To start IPython, I go to the Start menu, type in Anaconda, and then this Anaconda prompt application should pop up. Actually, it should pop up before you even finish typing Anaconda. So we go into there, and this brings up a command line terminal. Next, just type in IPython. After that, we can import all the libraries I mentioned earlier. If we don't get an error, that means they've been installed successfully. So let's try something simple like generating some random numbers and making a plot. Okay, so that's a plot of random noise. Let's make a histogram too. Okay, so we see a normal curve just like we expect. Now you can see that TensorFlow is not installed, which is why we get this error. But we can install it very easily by exiting IPython and then typing in pip install TensorFlow. Next, let's try to install Keras. So we get this error. So I looked this up and determined that we need to update pip. So let's do that by typing in conda install pip. Conda kind of works like pip in that way. They're all just tools for installing stuff. Okay, now let's try pip install Keras again. Alright, so everything works. Next, let's try to install NLTK. This is used in my NLP courses. So it looks like it's already installed, so there's nothing more to do. Just keep in mind, if we come across a library you don't care about, feel free to ignore it. I find it's useful just to install everything at the same time so that when you're deep in the code later, you don't have to think about stuff like this. So the next thing we'll install is CNTK. This is Microsoft's deep learning library. Notice how it's not part of pip, so you need to grab the URL manually from Microsoft's website. Unfortunately, it's a little hard to find because there are many pages that deal with how to install CNTK on Microsoft's website, but what you're looking for is a page that has a link to a WHL file. So copy and paste that after pip install. This is a good example because it shows you another way you can use pip by doing pip install and then a URL. Next, let's install PyTorch. This requires us to use a custom source, so we have to specify the option -c peterjc123. So that's conda install -c peterjc123 PyTorch. This is because a very nice guy called peterjc123 has provided us with a version of PyTorch that works on Windows. And once that's all done, we can verify that they've been installed correctly by going back to IPython. Alright, so TensorFlow works, Keras works, NLTK works, CNTK works, and Torch works. Next, let's install Theano. Theano has historically been pretty difficult to install on Windows, but nowadays, that's not the case. So if you go to their website, you'll see a bunch of instructions. If you don't want to use the GPU or you don't have a GPU, then the instructions will be very easy. I don't have a GPU on this machine, so I'm going to do the easy version. Keep in mind that Theano is really great for learning purposes, so it's totally fine, even if you have a GPU, to just install the CPU version for now and then use the GPU version of TensorFlow. Now I ended up upgrading MKL service and libPython since that's what they told me to do on Theano's website, but it looked like these were already installed. In fact, updating MKL service gave me an issue later, so we'll have to fix that. So if you want to install Theano for CPU only, that's conda install Theano. If you want to install Theano for the GPU, then do conda install Theano PyGPU. Now let me go into IPython and check if Theano works. So we get an error because of this MKL service thing that I mentioned earlier. So let's set this environment variable it's telling me to set. By the way, this is great to know if you don't yet know how to set environment variables on Windows. We can also check that it worked by using the echo command. So let's try that again. Let's do a simple example of adding two numbers in Theano, just to make sure everything's working. If you want to do something even more complicated, you can run this script from Deep Learning Part 2, which doesn't require any external dataset. So just go over to the folder ANN class 2 and type in python gridsearch.py. So that's going to look for hyperparameters using cross-validation. Now in this last section of this lecture, we're going to talk about reinforcement learning. When we start studying reinforcement learning, there is yet another library we'll need to install called OpenAI Gym. If you don't plan on learning reinforcement learning, you can skip this part of the lecture. This has also historically been very difficult, but luckily the open source community has put in the work so you don't have to. You're welcome to read through the GitHub issue on this if you want, but I'm going to just do the simplest thing that works. So let's first do pip install gym. Great, so that worked. Now the second command is a bit longer, so let's go to the actual GitHub issue and copy and paste the command. The easiest way to get there is just to go to Google and type in install OpenAI Gym Windows Anaconda or something along those lines. So let's paste that in. And notice how it fails since I haven't yet installed Git. So we can install Git by doing conda install Git. Now let's try it again. Unfortunately, this fails again because we need GCC, which is a C compiler. Now, one way to get GCC is to do conda install m2w64 toolchain. But unfortunately, I tried this and it also doesn't work. In fact, I think this toolchain was installed already. So I tried quite a few things that didn't work. So in order to save you some time, I'm going to recommend you only try the stuff on this page if everything else doesn't work for you. So what worked for me was to just grab the precompiled binary directly. Now in order to do that, you'll want to go to Kojoli's GitHub repo directly. So that's this URL here, github.com/kojoli/atari-pi/releases. Next, you'll want to download the WH file that matches your environment. So I have Python 3.6 on a 64-bit installation of Windows, so this is the file I want. Luckily, we already discussed earlier in this lecture how to install a WH file. That's just pip install and then the path to the file. So let's do that. Now we can test our installation by running a script that requires an Atari game. So let's cd over to rl2 and then Atari, and now let's run dqn_tf.py. Cool, so everything's good. Now the final thing we want to do for OpenAI Gym is if you want to play a video or save a video, you want to install ffmpeg. So to do that, you want to type in conda install -c menpo ffmpeg. Once you've done that, you can go to the cartpool folder and type in python saveavideo.py, and this will run a script that will play the cartpool game, show a plot, and then save a video. And of course, you can also play this video by just navigating to the file and clicking on it. So for now, that's everything. If I need to add new libraries or updates to this lecture, they will be appended at the end. Hey guys, in this lecture I'm going to show you how to set up your development environment so that you can follow along in these courses. First, let's talk about operating systems. The three big ones are Windows, Linux, and Mac. Most, but not all of my courses are part of the deep learning series. Eventually, the deep learning models we're going to build will become so complex that we will need specialized libraries like Theano and TensorFlow to implement them. Now, as of today, Theano and TensorFlow are not officially supported on Windows. So if you are interested in deep learning, you will discover pretty soon that there is not much you can do without a ton of work. Even working with non-GPU enabled libraries like NumPy and Matplotlib can be a challenge, but these are at least possible on Windows. If you really must use Windows and have your Python environment inside Windows, and you don't want to try the virtual machine method, which I'm going to discuss next, then one good library I know of is called Anaconda. You can get Anaconda at continuum.io/downloads. I can't vouch for this 100% because I haven't used it myself, but I've known others who have found it at least usable. Now I'm telling you this from experience. I've worked with a ton of clients one-on-one, and Python development, especially when it involves the NumPy SciPy stack, is not easy when it's on Windows. The method I'm going to describe using virtual machines will work on most modern computers, and as of right now, if you want to do any deep learning stuff, whether that be with Theano or TensorFlow, you cannot do this on Windows. With that out of the way, I'm going to quickly go over which courses I've released so far or plan to release in the near future that do not require Theano and TensorFlow, so it's possible to do on Windows. With these in mind, you can decide if you want to install a virtual machine or not, but I would highly recommend it because it's free and everyone can follow the same instructions. So we've got linear regression in Python, logistic regression in Python, which are the prerequisites to deep learning part 1. And we have deep learning in Python part 1, which is mostly in NumPy and a little bit of TensorFlow. We've got easy natural language processing in Python, data analytics, SQL for noobs, beginners, and marketers, cluster analysis and unsupervised machine learning in Python, and unsupervised machine learning, hidden Markov models in Python. This course is going to have a little bit of Theano in it. Next, here are some courses that depend heavily upon Theano or TensorFlow or both. We've got practical deep learning in Theano and TensorFlow, convolutional neural networks in Python, unsupervised deep learning in Python, and recurrent neural networks in Python. As you can see, a lot of interesting and complex stuff can be done in Theano and TensorFlow. Alright, so hopefully I've convinced you that using a virtual machine is a good idea. Windows is a great operating system, but it tends to not be as developer friendly since it tries to be more consumer friendly. Note that if you're on a Mac, this probably isn't necessary. You can just install NumPy, SciPy, Pandas, Matplotlib, Theano, and TensorFlow using easy installer pip. Sometimes this stuff can fail depending on the many combinations of versions of each thing that are possible, but usually just Googling your error message will lead you to the right solution on Stack Overflow. If you're on a Mac, you can just do sudo pip install NumPy, SciPy, IPython, Pandas, Matplotlib, and Theano. Alternatively, you can use easy install, which might have a more recent version. You may need to use easy install to install pip itself, which is just sudo easy install pip. If you want to install TensorFlow, just copy the command at tensorflow.org. It's just a pip install command that points to their custom installation location. I won't put it here since it corresponds to a specific version, and that version may become out of date by the time you watch this. That is good news because the people working on TensorFlow are updating it all the time. Alright, so if you've made it this far, that means you want to install a virtual machine with Linux on Windows, or that you're already using Linux and you want to know what commands to use to install these libraries. We are going to need two things to start for this tutorial: VirtualBox and a lightweight version of Ubuntu. I would recommend Xubuntu or Lubuntu. I'm going to use the 64-bit version of Lubuntu for this tutorial. So download these first and then return to the tutorial. Alright, so now that you've got VirtualBox installed, we're going to create a new machine with 64-bit Lubuntu. So you want to hit New, type in a name for your machine. And this stuff is already correct. I'm going to choose 2 gigs of memory. You can choose more memory if your computer has more memory. I'm going to create a virtual hard disk now. I'm going to choose dynamically allocated, and 8 gigs is good enough for this example. Alright, so I'm going to go to settings. If we go to storage, you can choose the ISO file that you downloaded. So I'm going to load up the Lubuntu ISO that you downloaded from lubuntu.net. Alright, so hit OK and hit start. Okay, so it's going to take you through the installation of Lubuntu. So you want to hit install. Alright, so Lubuntu is going to take you through some prompts. Alright, so you want to erase disk and install Ubuntu, and I'm not going to check any of these. Just hit continue. Alright, so once that's done, it's going to ask you to restart. So just hit restart now. Alright, now that you're in the machine, what I always like to do, if you notice how this window is too big for my Mac window, you can make the inner window resizable by installing guest editions. And this also lets you do useful things like cut and paste between machines. So you want to open a terminal. You go to System Tools, select LX Terminal. Now I'm going to cd into that folder. Cool, so the correct command was sudo /vbox/linuxeditions.run. Notice how there was something that failed in there, so we need to install GCC. So you want to run sudo apt-get update, and then run sudo apt-get upgrade. So the next thing is you want to sudo apt-get install build essential. All right, once you've done that, we can try to run VBox additions again. So that's sudo /vbox Linux. All right, so everything worked this time, so we're going to restart this machine. All right, so now the window is only as big as I want to drag it. Okay, so now we can install the actual data science stuff. So you want to open again LX terminal, do a sudo apt-get update again. Now you want to install, it's a long list, so Python NumPy, Python SciPy, Python Matplotlib, IPython, Python pip, Python dev, and Python setup tools. Just hit yes. All right, so now that that's installed, you can test it out. You can type in IPython. So IPython is open. Import NumPy. NumPy is working. Import SciPy. Import Pandas. Right, we don't have Pandas yet. We will install that next. Import Matplotlib. Cool, so we have everything we've installed so far. So now we're going to install Pandas and Theano. So that's pip install ---- upgrade Pandas Theano. Alright, so now we've got Theano. The last thing we need is TensorFlow. To get this, you guys want to go to the TensorFlow website and just grab the latest command, since they're updating the package all the time. So let's open a browser. Let's search for install TensorFlow. All right, so you take this code, copy it, you paste it into here. All right, now you've got Theano and TensorFlow. You can test them out. Go to github.com/lazyprogrammer/machine learning examples. Alright, so you need Git if you want to check out this code with Git. So let's install Git. Alright, so let's run our clone command again. Let's try the HTTPS version. Okay, so this one works. All right, so use CD into machine learning examples. Go into ANN class 2. So this has some introductory TensorFlow and Theano code. So just run Python Theano1.py, since this does not require any data. Cool, so it seems everything is working. Now let's try the TensorFlow example. So it's TensorFlow 1. Alright, so you want to make sure you install the correct TensorFlow. You want the CPU only version. Hopefully it just overwrites the other version without any trouble. Cool, so let's try the example again. Super, so now everything is working. Now if you want, there is a text editor that I highly recommend. It's called Sublime Text. So you hit download. You go to Ubuntu 64-bit. You save this. And it will automatically be installed. Alright, so now you have the exact same text editor that I use in my lectures. So you open machine learning examples, and this is all of our code.